7 years of my life. 7 years of burnt office coffee, forced smiles, and swallowing my pride so deep I could feel it in my boots. And all it took to end it was one phone call from a guy losing his mind on a Tuesday the 1st. I'd love to tell you I was shocked. I wasn't. What I was ready. Welcome back to my channel. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing. They just chose the opposite. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. Let me back you up a bit, because this story doesn't start in Rome. It doesn't start with that phone call either. It starts on a freezing afternoon in October, 2 years before the explosion, when I was elbow deep in a filing cabinet on the 42nd floor of the Willis Tower, hunting for a misplaced contractor agreement that Pam swore she'd filed under C. And I swore she'd filed under whatever letter she pulled out of a hat that morning. I never found the contractor agreement. What I found instead was a thick, dust-covered manila folder wedged all the way in the back, stuffed with documents that hadn't seen the light of day since the Clinton administration. The label read, Asterisk Sterling Vanguard Group, Corporate Bylaws, Origin 1992, Asterisk. I almost shoved it back. Almost. I don't know what made me sit down at my desk and crack it open. Maybe it was just a slow Tuesday. Maybe it was something older and far more bitter than boredom. Because here's the reality of working for your father-in-law. It's not a career. It's a daily reminder of exactly where you sit in somebody else's universe. And Vance Sterling had made it crystal clear from the moment Kate introduced us 15 years ago at a steakhouse in Lincoln Park that I was just an extra in his movie. When Kate introduced us, he looked me up and down the way a guy inspects a rental car he didn't want and said, So you're the guy Kate's been keeping a secret. Remind me what you do? I told him I worked in corporate logistics. He nodded like I just told him I folded boxes for a living. That was day one. It never improved. So, yeah, maybe the reason I read those corporate bylaws was 7 years of being called champ by a 7-5-year-old titan who built his entire personality on looking down at people from whatever penthouse he could afford. I read every single page, taking my time. The way you read a contract when your gut tells you your life is about to flip and you don't want to miss a comma. I almost skimmed past it, anyway. It was buried deep in Section 9, Article 4, wrapped in the kind of dense legal jargon designed to make a person's brain shut off. But I read it 3 times, then a 4th. By the 5th time, I wasn't reading, I was strategizing. The clause stated exactly this. Asterisk. Any executive of Sterling Vanguard Group who is terminated without documented cause following no fewer than 6 years of continuous full-time employment shall be entitled to an equity buyout equivalent to 15% of the firm's total valuation at the time of dismissal. Asterisk. I sat frozen in my leather chair for a solid 10 minutes. Then I picked up my phone and called Luke. Run that by me again, Luke said. We were sitting at the Iron Horse on Rush Street. 3 beers deep, the happy hour crowd thinning out, the bartender wiping down the taps like he was paid to be deaf. Listen closely, I said. If Vance fires me without a documented reason after 6 continuous years of working there, I walk away with 15% of the firm. Luke just stared at me. You've already been there for 5 years. 5 years and 3 months. He picked up his pint glass, hovered it near his mouth, and set it back down. Mark, that's not a corporate policy. That's a winning Powerball ticket. It's better than Powerball, I told him. Powerball is luck. I can control this. I just have to make him fire me. On my timeline. After year 6. Luke looked at me the way a guy looks at his buddy when he can't tell if he's witnessing a masterstroke or a total mental collapse. He leaned back against the bar rail. Does Kate know? Not yet. You have to tell her. He leaned in closer. You need to tell her everything, Mark. Because if there is one person on God's green earth who wants to see that old man get knocked off his throne, it's your wife. He wasn't wrong, and honestly, deep down, I already knew that. I just needed him to validate it. Before we go any further, you need to understand who Kate is, because this victory is hers just as much as it is mine. Kate Sterling is 42 years old, and she is the most terrifyingly brilliant person I have ever known. Sharper than any senior VP on the 42nd floor. Sharper than Sarah Mitchell, who graduated top of her class at Northwestern Law, and wears it like a badge. Sharper than Vance himself, though he'd rather eat gravel than admit a woman outsmarted him. She has her mother's empathy and her father's ruthlessness, and she has spent her entire adult life utilizing the former and quietly boiling over the latter. Vance Sterling married June in 1978. From what people say, the early days were golden. But Vance had this nasty habit of amplifying his worst traits the wealthier he got. By the time Kate was 14, their massive estate out in Lake Forest felt like a prison. Vance wasn't physically abusive. He cared way too much about his country club reputation for that. What he did was insidious. It was the kind of psychological warfare that lives in a heavy sigh, or the precise way a guy can make his wife feel entirely useless just by staring at her. He'd talk over June at charity galas. He'd correct her grammar in front of their wealthy friends. He managed her the way he managed his hedge funds, auditing every credit card swipe, questioning every hobby, making her feel like a bad investment he was graciously keeping afloat. Kate saw all of it. Every stifled dinner, every passive-aggressive jab, every quiet moment where her mom would just deflate, excuse herself to the powder room, and stay gone for 30 minutes. June finally hit her breaking point when Kate was 18. She packed 3 suitcases on a Thursday afternoon while Vance was golfing, drove straight to her sister's place in Sedona, and filed the divorce papers 4 days later. Vance played the victim in public and turned into a monster in court. The settlement dragged on for almost 3 years and bled June dry because Vance had high-priced sharks and absolutely zero conscience. Kate never forgave him. Not really. Not the Hollywood way where the dad gets a tearful hug in the finale. The grace Vance got from his daughter was purely tactical, the kind that allows you to eat Thanksgiving dinner without throwing a glass of wine in someone's face. She kept him in her life because June begged her not to hold on to the poison, and because Kate knew that burning the bridge would cut her off from resources she might need. But she kept the receipts. Which is exactly why, when I sat across from her at our kitchen island in Lincoln Park, laid the 1,992 bylaws next to her coffee mug, and walked her through Section 9, Article 4, she didn't gasp. She didn't freak out. She didn't ask if the math was right. She read the paragraph 4 times, methodically. Then she locked eyes with me. He's never laid eyes on this document, has he? It wasn't a question. He inherited the firm, I replied. He inherited the whole empire. He never actually had to read the fine print. A look washed over her face. It wasn't rage. It was something colder. He treated my mother like a liability for 22 years, she said softly. He constantly implies I settled because I married a guy who doesn't play polo. He's called you champ for 7 years, Mark. 7 years. She tapped her nail against the paper. What's the play? Here is what you have to know about Vance Sterling. He's 75, built like a retired linebacker, and hasn't updated his worldview since the 80s. He keeps his silver hair perfectly styled, maintains a deep tan from winters in Palm Beach, and shakes your hand with the kind of bone-crushing grip that screams insecurity. He took over Sterling Vanguard from his dad, rode the biggest tech boom in history, and has been taking credit for the economy ever since. He patronizes everyone. It's not a mood. It's his operating system. He made me director of operations because he needed a lightning rod when quarterly earnings dipped. He gave me a decent office solely because Kate cornered him at a charity banquet, and he couldn't say no without looking cheap in front of Chicago's elite. He toasted me at the company holiday party in front of 50 people, calling me a decent hire, genuinely thinking he was bestowing an honor. The guy was completely blind to the bomb ticking under his own floorboards. Our strategy required 2 ingredients, endurance and bait. I had to finish year 6 with a flawless, bulletproof HR record, while simultaneously being just annoying enough that Vance's blood pressure stayed high. Not insubordinate enough to get fired times with times cause, just irritating enough to make him snap. Kate called it weaponized incompetence. I called it the hardest acting gig of my life. For 2 solid years, I was a saint on paper and a nightmare to Vance's ego. I politely pushed back on his outdated strategies during quarterly reviews, using hard data which, to a guy like Vance, is basically treason. I CC'd Sarah from legal on emails. Vance definitely wanted kept off the record. I started taking my entire allowed lunch break, every single day. I stopped chuckling at his tired sailing jokes. I walked in at exactly 8:30 a.m. and logged off at exactly 5:00 p.m., which in Vance's hustle culture brain was practically spitting in his face. "You've got a weird vibe lately," Vance muttered to me one morning, aggressively stirring his espresso. "Everything okay at home, champ?" "Just dialed into the analytics," I replied flatly. "Metrics are solid." He hated that. He wanted me to grovel. I gave him robotic competence, and that infuriated him more than if I'd flipped his desk. I didn't realize it yet, but Todd Vance's right-hand yes-man was already planting seeds, telling Vance I was getting arrogant, that I thought I ran the place. I heard this from Pam later. Pam heard everything, which made her the true CEO of the 42nd floor. Then came the Rome trap. Kate orchestrated it, which was brilliant. She pitched it during Sunday brunch at Vance's estate, the kind of property that has wrought iron gates and a private driveway. She dropped the idea casually, like she was talking about the weather. "Mark hasn't taken a real breather in ages," she said, buttering a croissant. 7 years. Barely a long weekend. "I'm booking us a trip to Rome. 3 weeks. Beth, Vance's third wife, a sweet lady from Scottsdale who knew the golden rule was to stay quiet and look pretty, clasped her hands. "Oh, Italy. That's gorgeous." Vance was sawing into his eggs Benedict. 3 weeks is a massive stretch to be offline. HR confirmed he's sitting on 28 rolled over PTO days. Kate fired back effortlessly. "Sarah signed the approval forms yesterday." Vance stopped chewing. He glared at me across the marble table. The silence stretched just long enough to make Beth visibly uncomfortable. I held his stare, perfectly blank. "Enjoy the pasta," he finally grunted, sounding like he'd swallowed a lemon. He had no idea what that trip was about to cost him. We touched down in Rome on Thursday, September 4th. Kate and I were standing on the terrace of our hotel, overlooking the Pantheon. She clinked her Aperol spritz against my glass. "Countdown?" "9 days," I said. Then he snaps. "You sure?" Luke bet he'd blow a gasket in 48 hours. I'm giving him 9 days. I know his breaking point. She gave me a genuine smile, the kind that Vance's toxic orbit had made so rare I actually kept track of them. On day 2, I texted Vance a selfie from the Colosseum. Caption: asterisk. Mind-blowing architecture. You'd love the stonework. Asterisk. He left me on read. On day 4, I had Pam reschedule 3 minor vendor calls for the following month, knowing Todd would sprint to Vance with the crisis. On day 6, Kate posted a video of us eating gelato near the Trevi Fountain. Beth immediately liked it and undoubtedly showed it to Vance. Day 9 was Tuesday, September 12th. I was lounging on the terrace, espresso in hand, watching Rome come alive, when my cell phone vibrated. Asterisk. Incoming call. Vance Sterling. Asterisk. I showed the screen to Kate, who was sitting on the edge of the bed. She gave me a single, slow nod. I swiped accept. "Vance," I said casually, "what in the absolute hell is going through your head?" He roared. The voice that had terrorized analysts for 3 decades was completely unhinged. "Todd just told me the logistics team is practically asleep at the wheel. You bumped 3 critical syncs without running it by me, and you're over there eating damn spaghetti?" I let him vaunt. "Vance. Listen. Do not interrupt me. I am the founder of this empire. I built this from the dirt up." He didn't, but whatever. "You book a flight back tonight. You hear me? Tonight. Or don't bother swiping your badge ever again. You're finished. I don't employ dead weight who abandons the ship." Entitled hack. "I always knew you were a—" I laughed. Not a polite, awkward chuckle. A booming, from-the-chest laugh. 7 years of suppressed garbage, just spilling out of me over a transatlantic cell tower. And then I hung up. Kate walked over, took my espresso, took a sip, and handed it back. Down below, the Roman traffic buzzed, completely oblivious to the billionaires throwing tantrums across the ocean. "Did he cross the line?" she asked. "He crossed it. Fired me on the spot." "So, what's next?" she smirked. I looked out over the ancient ruins. "We enjoy the rest of our vacation. Then we go back to Chicago and collect." We had 12 days left in Italy, and we enjoyed every single minute. There is a very specific type of silence that surrounds a guy who gets fired over the phone but decides to finish his European holiday anyway. I felt it the second we landed at O'Hare on Sunday, September 14th. It followed us to baggage claim and rode with us in the Uber all the way down the Kennedy Expressway. Kate always takes the lead when the stakes are high. It grounds her. "You good to go?" she asked, unlocking our front door. "I've been good to go for 2 years." "I know," she smiled. We didn't touch the corporate world that Sunday. We ordered deep dish, unpacked, and let Vance stew in whatever paranoid cocktail he'd been brewing since Tuesday. Ignoring a control freak is the ultimate power move. Luke showed up that night with a bottle of Woodford Reserve and the frantic energy of a guy who had been holding his breath for 2 weeks. He dropped onto my sofa. "Give me the play-by-play." "Now." I told him everything. When I got to the part where I laughed in Vance's ear and disconnected, Luke buried his face in a throw pillow and screamed into it. "You hung up on Vance Sterling," he gasped. Mid-rant, he looked at Kate. "Is his pulse always this low?" 22 years with my family," she said, pouring a glass of bourbon. "You adapt." Luke raised his glass to Section 9, Article 4. We toasted. For a brief moment, listening to the Chicago wind rattle the windows, it felt easy. Monday, September 15th. Day 1 of Vance Sterling's nightmare. I put on my sharpest navy suit, the one Kate bought me in New York that Vance once said was too flashy for a mid-level guy, and took the L train downtown. I badged into the Willis Tower, rode up to 42, and strolled through the glass double doors of Sterling Vanguard. At precisely 8:55 a.m., the bullpen went dead silent. Rita, the front desk manager, dropped her pen. Her face cycled through shock, dread, and then an aggressive neutral mask. "Mr. Sterling." "I mean, Mark," she stammered. "We didn't expect you." "Why wouldn't you, Rita?" I smiled warmly. She glanced nervously toward the executive suites. Vance called an all-hands leadership huddle for 9. "Fantastic," I said. "I love a good huddle." The main boardroom on the 42nd floor has panoramic views of Lake Michigan, which no one ever looks at because Vance demands all the oxygen in the room. He was pacing at the head of the mahogany table, adjusting his Rolex, looking exactly like a 7-5-year-old tyrant, pretending he was 40. Todd was glued to his left. Chad, another VP, was on his right. Diane, the senior board member who actually held the purse strings, was at the far end, tapping her iPad, completely bored. The room held 7 people. It became 8 when I pushed the door open. Vance froze. I will give the devil his due, he didn't flinch. Decades of bullying had given him a poker face made of granite, but you could see the gears jamming in his head as he tried to figure out if I was there to beg for my job or throw a punch. He opted for intimidation. "Mark," he growled, "the tone you'd use for a stray dog on your lawn." "Vance," I replied cheerfully, pulling out a chair. I grabbed the carafe and poured myself a coffee. The room was paralyzed. Todd was staring at his legal pad like it held the secrets to the universe. "You were terminated," Vance said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Over a cell phone," I said, blowing on my coffee. "While I was on approved, documented PTO. This isn't the forum for," Todd squeaked. "Quiet, Todd," Vance snapped. Todd practically folded into himself. Vance locked eyes with me. "You're done. You don't work here. Put the mug down and leave." "Actually, I need to speak with Sarah," I said, not moving an inch. "Silence." "Sarah Mitchell," I clarified, looking around. "Head of legal. I have some severance inquiries." "Standard HR stuff." I made sure standard sounded as threatening as possible. Vance's jaw began to lock. A slow, rhythmic grinding motion that Kate told me he used to do right before he shattered plates in the kitchen. "Security is coming. Get out," Vance hissed. "No problem," I said, standing up and casually buttoning my suit jacket. "Tell Sarah I'll be at the Iron Horse. She knows it." I waved at the frozen executives. "Great seeing everyone." "Diane, love the scarf." Diane desperately bit her lower lip to hide a smirk. I walked out, hit the elevator button, and rode down 42 floors feeling lighter than air. Sarah called me at 11:30 a.m. I was nursing a club soda at the bar. Big Mike, the owner, had unlocked the doors early for me because I'd once helped his nephew out of a bad lease. Mark, Sarah said. Her voice was flat, devoid of its usual corporate chipperness. We need a sit-down. I mentioned that this morning. Not at the tower. That was the tell. Sarah was Sterling's pit bull. But she was a lawyer first. She had an ethical duty to the firm, not just the CEO. The hesitation in her voice meant she had spent her morning digging into the archives. You found the vintage stuff, didn't you? I asked. A heavy pause. Where are you? The Iron Horse. Rush Street. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Sarah walked in at 1:15 p.m. looking like she hadn't blinked in hours. She was 52, sharp as a tack, wearing a slate gray blazer, and carrying a locked briefcase that I knew held the 1,992 bylaws. She sat down, ordered a black coffee, and stared at me. You memorized it, didn't you? She asked. When did you realize? I countered. 4 days ago. She rubbed her temples. She popped the briefcase open. There it was, printed, tabbed, and heavily annotated in red ink. She pushed it toward me. Do you comprehend the math on this? Sarah whispered. 15% of Sterling Vanguard. With the recent tech mergers, you're talking about an astronomical payout. I've run the spreadsheet, Sarah. He will bury you in litigation, Mark. He has bottomless pockets. It will take a decade. I leaned over the bar. Sarah, I found that paragraph 2 years ago. I spent 24 months turning my HR file into a masterpiece. I have 6 full years of perfect performance reviews, 0 infractions, and a verbal termination delivered without cause while I was in Europe on a approved vacation. I'm eager. Sarah stared at the red ink on the paper. Then she did something I'd never seen her do. She slumped. He fired you from Rome, she muttered, shaking her head. Tuesday the 1st, I said, because I sent him a picture of a tourist trap. He called my team incompetent during the Q3 review. In front of the entire board, she said softly. She snapped the briefcase shut. I have a massive conflict of interest. I cannot advise you. She reached into her blazer and slid a sleek, matte black business card across the wood. But you need to call her. She's lethal. And she is going to have a field day with this. I picked it up. Chloe Adler, attorney at law. One more thing, Sarah said, standing up. The quarterly board vote is Thursday. Diane runs the oversight committee. Any stakeholder with an active claim can attend. She gave me a very pointed look. See you around. I dialed Kate immediately. It's on. How bad is the bleeding? She asked. I looked out the window at the Chicago traffic. Fatal. I could hear my wife, the woman who had watched her father destroy her mother's spirit, who had smiled through 1,000 patronizing family dinners, let out a laugh so victorious it gave me chills. Thursday arrived. I was up at 5:45 a.m. I was standing by the coffee maker in my navy suit. When Kate walked in, she grabbed a mug. Game day, she said. Game day. I met my new lawyer, Chloe Adler, in the lobby of the Willis Tower at 8:45 a.m. Chloe was 55, had 45 consecutive trial wins, and possessed the terrifying aura of a woman who already knew the verdict before the judge spoke. We hit the 42nd floor. Rita reached for the panic button. Stand down, Rita, Chloe said without breaking stride. Vance was holding court in the boardroom. Todd, Chad, Diane, and the rest of the board. Chloe walked in and slammed 10 spiral-bound copies of Section 9, Article 4, onto the polished table. Vance's jaw went into overdrive. What kind of circus is this? It's a contract, Mr. Sterling, Chloe said, her voice dripping with ice. A legally binding clause from your own foundational documents. My client was terminated without cause after 6 years and 1 week of flawless service. He is executing his buyout. Get Sarah in here, Vance barked. The side door opened. Sarah walked in and stood exactly in the center of the room. Tell them it's garbage, Vance demanded. Sarah looked him dead in the eye. It is fully enforceable, Vance. I spent 4 days trying to find a loophole. There isn't one. I'm sorry. Vance's face contorted. The invincibility cracked. The panic set in, and predictably, he lashed out. You're a parasite. Vance shouted at me, using the exact tone he used to break June down. I gave you a paycheck because my daughter begged me. You've been coasting for 7 years. You think you deserve a piece of my legacy? Vance. Every head whipped around. Kate was standing in the back corner. She had slipped in behind us. She walked slowly toward the front, commanding the room effortlessly. I watched you torture Mom until she couldn't breathe, Kate said, her voice perfectly level. I watched her pack her car and flee to Sedona just to survive you. And then I watched you try to bankrupt her. Vance opened his mouth, but Kate cut him off. You hired Mark to humiliate him. You called him champ because you need everyone around you to feel small. You built this firm with Grandpa's trust fund and other people's sweat. She stepped right up to the head of the table. And today, you lose it all because you fired your son-in-law over the phone because a photo of a monument hurt your fragile feelings. She didn't yell. That was the kill shot. She just looked at him with pure pity. I love you because I have to. But I have never, ever respected you. She turned and walked out. Diane cleared her throat. All in favor of ratifying the equity transfer under Section 9? The hands went up. Vance was a ghost in his own chair. The collapse was spectacular. By the end of the week, Pam had accidentally leaked an HR folder to Chloe. 14 former employees filed grievances, hostile workplace, wage theft, the works. Vance bled money on defense attorneys. The board voted to oust him the following Tuesday. He held out for a week, refusing to sell his shares out of sheer pride. Until the math crushed him. He quietly sold his majority stake to Diane on a rainy Friday. No press release, no farewell party. Just an old man signing a paper and taking the elevator down. I sold my 15% to Diane a week later. Luke asked me why I didn't keep it and take over. I never cared about the logistics business, I told him. I cared about the clause. I wanted the bully to finally pay the toll. The buyout was astronomical, enough to disappear forever. Kate and I sat at the kitchen island in Lincoln Park one last time. Where to? She asked. Somewhere nobody cares what a hedge fund is, I said. We packed up and moved out west by November. June flew out to see us for the holidays. When Kate told her the whole story over wine, June just smiled, looked at the mountains, and said, I always knew he'd run out of victims. Luke calls us every Sunday. A few months ago, he asked if I ever missed the hustle. I thought about the 42nd floor, the navy suit, and the burnt coffee. Not for a second, I said. Some guys spend decades building castles. Vance Sterling built his for 30 years and lost the keys on a Tuesday in September because he couldn't keep his mouth shut on a phone call to Rome. 7 years of champ, one forgotten contract, and a daughter who never forgot the score.